question come in about churches facing east, and the question simply was, do all churches face east? And the simple answer to that is no. But the more interesting answer looks back at the history of church building, and we recognize that actually before around 1520, the vast majority of churches did in fact face east, or rather, the people within those churches faced east when they prayed. Now, in most cases, that meant the church was built so the altar was at the east end of the building, and people looking towards it and the priest at the altar were all in the same direction. In a minority of cases, for example in the city of Rome itself, buildings were built actually facing west, but the priest at the altar would always face east. So the altar was at the back of the church, and the priest and the people would turn east during the Eucharistic prayer in order to pray towards the direction of the rising sun. That was the case for 1500 years of Christianity, and it was a deliberate choice. There could have been other choices made about how to build churches. For example, Roman theatres were well known to the early Christians, but they did not choose that amphitheatre style. They rather chose the basilica style, which is a long hall with one direction. After about 1520, something changed, and I think we can credit the Jesuits for this great change, which is that the focus of the Mass was the altar, and there were no screens in churches anymore. And the church building itself became the place where the world was. The community was gathered there, and it didn't really matter whether it was actually east or whatever, because inside the church building, wherever the altar was east. And this was the idea of a liturgical east. So after about 1520, people stopped really worrying about what direction churches were built in. In our diocese, for example, our own cathedral is aligned east-west, but the altar was at the west end of the building. And even in Stamford, the basilica there has the same arrangement. Whereas in Norwalk, the Church of St. Mary, in fact, does face east in the old way. But people didn't really worry about whether it was east or west. As long as the altar was the focal point, you had a liturgical east. It's an interesting question, and those answers are really the kind of the historical landscape. But nevertheless, the most important thing to remember is that when we pray, that our direction is all the same, towards the Lord who comes.